It's now Sunday night, 9 p.m., almost 40 hours into this kidnapping nightmare.
My body was in such bad shape, and I was just kind of feeling worse and just not optimistic at all that we would be found.
What Nicholas Kollias doesn't know is that the cavalry is on the way. Remember Hughes and Gigliotti, the girls who lured the football players to that house of horrors? They eventually gave police 2 addresses. A SWAT team is now ready to hit the first, 22 Harvest Street. Not even knowing if it's the right house, they roll up.
It was eerily silent.
Then, out of the darkness, appears a figure. Someone from inside comes out and sees the swarm of a heavily armed SWAT team.
Very quickly, and he ran back inside and shut the door.
The individual who was nicknamed the caretaker came into the room, and this was the only time I actually saw any of the individuals' faces without a mask on. He was like trying to untie us real fast.
Outside, the SWAT team sets explosive charges on 2 doors. They call breach. Then,
both explosive charges go off.
The house just lit up.
The door gets blown inside.
I didn't know what was going on.
As the doorway opens up, one person will go left, another person will go right.
Upon entry, the SWAT team sees 2 individuals.
There was 2 suspects inside the living room, took them in custody.
Cops still aren't sure they're in the hostage house. They make their way through the kitchen, then they see a closed door.
As they go through the door, they look in there, and sure enough, there's the 2 football players are sitting on the floor. There was remnants of tape around their ankles and hands. They just looked like they'd been through hell.
I thought the house was being burned down. In reality, they were saving my life.
We rolled the dice on the first house we hit was the correct one. This is a once-in-a-career rescue.
Do you remember when they came into the room?
At first, I was kind of scared because it was more individuals just covered in body armor and these huge guns, and I was just terrified.
Yeah, I'd be pretty scared too.
Yeah, so I put my hands up and I'm like, I'm innocent, like, please don't shoot me again. They got us out of the house, got me into an ambulance and off to the hospital.
After more than 40 hours of sheer hell, Nicholas and Ani are reunited with their families.
I just remember seeing both my parents, and more specifically my father. He just came over to me in the stretcher and stuff, and he was like, you're safe now, and you're gonna be all right.
Nicholas spent the next 25 days in intensive care. As the investigation begins, cops find a stomach-churning video on one of the violent kidnappers' cell phones. Again, a warning, what you're about to see is deeply disturbing. Ani lies bleeding on the floor as the attacker prods and threatens him with an electric hedge trimmer. The camera swings right to reveal Nicholas curled up in pain as the kidnappers throw slurs and prod his injured leg.
Look at the what? I'm in this. On this video?
There's a video.
You recording, homie? This gonna do when they take 4 pounds from me. This right here. Stupid.
Yo.
Look at your boy. He ain't got nothing to do. He just start running. Shut up. Shut up.
You run with the wrong one. Please. Shut the window.
I'll do anything.
Cops believe the students were rescued in the nick of time.
The plan really was to basically drain all the bank accounts. Niko had a pretty good sum of money. What the bad guys didn't know is you can't access those funds on the weekend. So they were waiting until 8 o'clock in the morning when they could actually access those accounts. And I'm sure once they did that, they probably would have killed them.
A month later, all of the perpetrators are in custody. An unbelievable 9 in total. 5 men and 4 women.
I kind of always thought of women as like harmless individuals that couldn't hurt a fly.
I know exactly what you mean. When I was kidnapped, the night I was kidnapped, I was terrified. I remember when I heard the woman's voice, I remember thinking, it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be all right. There's a woman there, like, nothing that bad can happen. Sometimes I wondered if maybe she was worse than he was.
Monroe County District Attorney Sandra Doorley says the case was like no other and deserved special attention.
I knew that it was going to be high profile, and it affected a lot of people in this community personally. So I really wanted to make sure that my best people were on it.
This case is a lot of things. It's tragic, sad, but what it certainly is just disgusting.
Of the nefarious 9, 5 end up taking plea deals, including Samantha Hughes and Leah Gigliotti, the women who lured Nicholas and Ani to the house that night. The 5 received sentences of 13 to 35 years in prison. The other 4 take their chances at trial.
The evidence was overwhelming. As Christine and I got ready for this trial, it was harder to figure out what we weren't going to use than it was to figure out what we were going to use. There was just that much.
But there was one key piece of evidence the jurors would see.
The cell phone video was clearly, in my opinion, the most essential piece of evidence, and perhaps, yes, also the most damning as well. It essentially showed 30 seconds of torture, and when you put that in perspective, that was only 30 seconds out of almost 40 hours. So you can only imagine what they went through during the other 39 hours and change.
Ani and Nicholas, who both testify against their kidnappers, watched that grotesque video in court.
It was terrible to take me back to that time, and it was just so sickening and heartbreaking.
The ringleader, Lydell Strickland, played a starring role in that video.
Lydell Strickland was enjoying what was going on.
He's also seen in other damning videos cops find around town.
There were just multiple banks all over the city of Rochester that Lydell Strickland was seen using on Nicholas's TD Ameritrade card. It's clearly his face. In one video, he actually pulls up still wearing a mask that he was wearing during the other cell phone video.
After a month-long trial, all 4 defendants are found guilty on all counts. 3 of the defendants are sentenced 7 to 15 years. Lydell Strickland gets 155 years to life.
I feel like for each of these defendants and for these victims that justice was served.
Nicholas has filed a $10 million lawsuit against the 9 kidnappers. But what was the monster's motive for perpetrating this horrific crime? It was not just about money, but revenge. And in a shocking twist, it turns out the kidnappers got the wrong guys.
It was definitely a case of mistaken identity.
Mistaken identity? That's right. Cops say the target was a completely different University of Rochester football player, Isaiah Smith. Smith, a star athlete and well-known drug dealer, found a spare key to Ani and his twin brother's apartment. Cops say Isaiah Smith then used that apartment to rob Lydell Strickland and his gang of thugs. Strickland and company then wanted revenge, so they told the girls to go get the football players who ripped them off.
The drug dealers, when they came back, were looking for the people who lived in that apartment, not realizing that it was just being used by somebody else. So it was definitely a case of mistaken identity.
It's appalling.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Completely
totally
appalling.
unbelievable, and it's
Unacceptable.
just, yeah.
But Nicholas says there's more to the story and is holding the University of Rochester responsible. He says after Isaiah Smith was arrested, football coaches bailed Smith out of jail, then failed to inform the student body of the severity of the crime, all in an attempt to give the star athlete preferential treatment.
The university was just completely negligent in what they did. My life was put in jeopardy on numerous occasions, all because of, Isaiah getting bailed out and poor decision-making on many university officials.
Nicholas plans to file a civil suit against the University of Rochester. We contacted the University of Rochester, and it responded in part, "We disagree with Mr. Kollias' assertions, but we continue to wish him the best as he moves forward after this traumatic experience." Sadly, Nicholas and Ani are no longer friends. He says during their 40-hour ordeal, he received more of the abuse than Ani did, and he thinks he knows why.
I just feel like with everything that happened, I feel like he had more to do with it than he will ever admit. I was the one that got majority of all of the beating and abuse, and so, you know, it was just not a good experience to have someone who you thought you could trust and just kind of being the complete opposite to you.
We reached out to Ani for comment, but he never responded. There was no evidence presented at trial that Ani was in any way involved in planning or carrying out the kidnapping. Ani Okiki-Iwu has never been considered anything other than a victim. Nicholas is now trying to move on with his life. He says although the nightmare he survived will never leave him, he's working hard to not let it define him.
People who survive very violent crimes, yes, it's a miracle, it's miraculous that we're here. But I don't think people realize that sometimes surviving is harder.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's not easy. You know, for me, I have always said that I don't want this to hold me back. I don't want this to, you know, label me. I'm not gonna let these individuals mess up the rest of my life. And so that's why I'm trying to be optimistic and just positive and move forward in the best way that I can.
Even with all he went through, Nicholas still managed to graduate college a semester early and now works for a financial services firm. He still has a titanium rod in his left leg and a bullet lodged in his right calf. I'm Chris Hansen. If you like this story, make sure you tune in every day to Crime Watch Daily. You can find where the show airs in your city at crimewatchdaily.com. Watch it live or record it on your DVR and watch it at night. And to all those criminals out there, remember, we are watching.